Welcome everyone to another Packers News free agency live stream virtually alongside Pete Dougherty. I am Olivia Reiner. Before we get to talking about the Packers' latest free agent signing in wide receiver Devin Funchess, I want to remind you, if you're new here, hello, welcome. We always love to hear from you over on our Facebook page. Make sure you leave a comment down in our comment section, whether it's a question, just a general thought you're having, and we will try to address that at the end of our show. We're leaving lots of time at the end so you can get your questions in. If you didn't get to ask Pete a question during his chat earlier today, perhaps now is your time to do so. So, Pete, let's dive right into it. The Packers are reportedly expected to sign wide receiver Devin Funchess yesterday. We found out that news late last night. The terms of the deal have yet to be announced. However, last season in 2019, we know that he signed a one-year deal, $10 million with the Indianapolis Colts. That being said, he missed all but one of those games because he broke his clavicle. Given his injury history and the fact that we know the Packers' current cap situation going into this deal, they were around $13 million under the cap in 2020. How likely is it that Funchess will be signed to a veteran minimum deal?
I'm really curious to see this contract because it'll tell us what they're envisioning here, whether they just see him as a rotational guy fighting for a roster spot or whether they see him as a guy who's probably going to be in their top three, maybe. It depends, their pay and the guaranteed money will tell us a lot there. I'm just not sure. I don't think, I would guess he's going to make more than the minimum, but still not very much. I don't know. I was thinking, 2 million, 2.5, something like that. Probably a lot of incentives in there. But I don't know for sure. And I guess we'll find out in the next day or two, as our colleague Tom Silverstein, can't remember if he tweeted it or if he said it in our group text when we're, talking about work in our group text. But basically, if it had been a pretty good contract, his agent would have told reporters what it was. So not doing that means it's almost for sure on the lower end. I'm guessing it's above the minimum that they got it done now, but I can't say that for sure.
Let's discuss some of Funchess's stats. So he was drafted by Carolina in the second round back in 2015. 2017 was by far his strongest season. He had 63 catches for 840 yards and 8 touchdowns. In 2018, he saw a bit of a drop off, 44 catches, 549 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Given what we know about his past production, what role does general manager Brian Gutekunst expect Funchess to compete for among the pre-existing Packers receiving core?
As everyone who follows this team knows, he's got Gutekunst definitely has a type when it comes to receivers, right? You basically have to be a basketball player who plays football, over 6'3" or 4. There's a lot to like about those things. The huge catch radius, that's big. That makes that helps with the quarterback's accuracy so much that they can catch balls that other guys can't, that they can catch in stride balls that other guys would have to maybe lunge for or even dive for. But it sounds like his speed's not the greatest. He ran 4.5 at his campus workout reportedly, but 4.71 at the combine. You got to suspect the combine time is a lot closer to what his real speed is, and he's running on the same surface there that everybody else is. So I'm still thinking this could, he might just be a number 4 receiver. I would still think that with the way Lazard finished last season, I would think the Packers are more excited about Lazard than they are about Funchess. That would be my guess.
Speaking of Allen Lazard, Packers wide receiver, Devin Funchess also falls into that category of lengthier receivers. As you mentioned, he's 6'4". Allen Lazard, Equanimeous St. Brown, and Marquez Valdes-Scantling are all in that 6'4" class. How does Funchess compare to that Packers core of lengthy receivers?
I guess he's similar. Actually, he's slower. Valdes-Scantling ran 4.39 on the same surface at the combine, and St. Brown ran 4. It was either 4.45 or 4.49. Right in that range, which is a lot faster than 4.71. So both of those guys are actually faster. Now Funchess has been in the league longer. He knows NFL offenses better. So he's got the veteran, he's a veteran, so he can probably adjust a lot faster to coming to a new team. But I'm not sure how different he is than those guys. He might be a little stronger than Valdez-Scantling, for instance. In fact, I'm sure he is. But all those guys have a somewhat similar skill set, and I would think in the draft that the Packers will be looking for that Gutekunst will be looking for somebody who can really run, and the size won't be quite as important. Maybe he can find someone who's got both. Mims from Baylor kind of fits that with both, but they really they need some explosiveness on the offensive side of the ball. This did feel a little redundant, signing the guy with the similar skill set, but if they, the Packers used to have an offseason basketball team that would go around the state and play at high schools every once in a while for fundraisers. No more, of course, because of injuries, but if they wanted to, they could probably put together a pretty good basketball team now.
Head coach Matt LaFleur would not be participating in that basketball league. I can't say that for sure, but I know after tearing his ACL last season while playing basketball with some coaches, he's probably not a big fan of the team-wide basketball team. But I like that thinking there, Pete. Let's take a bigger picture look at free agency so far. As we mentioned, we don't know the exact contract details when it comes to Funchess. However, we do know a little bit more about the other free agent signings, including inside linebacker Christian Kirksey. He has about a $4 million cap hit in 2020. Right tackle Rick Wagner has about a $4.8 million cap hit in 2020. How do these lower budget signings impact the Packers' ability to bring back 2021 free agents like left tackle David Bakhtiari or defensive tackle Kenny Clark?
I would think they should have plenty of room. The cap, right now the economy, there's huge questions about that, but it's eventually going to bounce back sometime the next year or two. And, every year when the contract for TV comes up, there's always this, I wonder if they'll get as much money, if they'll get that big an increase. There's the appetite for the NFL is so big. The TV networks are still going to pay huge money for the broadcast and streaming rights. So the cap is going to go way up in the next few years, every year probably. So they have cap room to do some things. The bigger thing is probably just the cash, because Clark and Bakhtiari are both going to get a lot of guaranteed money and probably big signing bonus. And so that's going to cost a lot of cash, and they have to put most of that money in escrow for whatever's guaranteed. So if some of it's guaranteed the following year, not just the signing bonus, the Packers have no access to that money. So it'll be a big cash hit, but I would think, they're really well suited for it. I still think if something came along where they had to pay a guy, someone who they really wanted, they had to pay him $8 or $9 or even $10 million a year, they could swing it. It would put a little more pressure on future caps, and it would take maybe a little more creativity, but they could swing it. But as things stand now, if they make one more bargain signing, I think they'd be sitting in good shape for getting those deals done, those extensions done comfortably.
We'll see if they decide to make another signing, if they are able to. That being said, Pete, we've discussed inside linebacker, right tackle, wide receiver, all positions that the Packers addressed in free agency. How likely is it that the Packers draft any of those positions with their 30th pick in the draft?
I think there's a very good chance. Those are all three guys are stopgap guys. So it gives them the luxury of picking someone, whether it's 30 or 62, who wouldn't necessarily have to come in and start right away. There's a fallback person there to start. They could bring the person along a little more slowly. So I think those positions are as likely as any. I would think those are the three prime positions, along with maybe defensive line. But there's not many positions I'd rule out in the first round and just say no way. And I still wonder if there's a really good chance they might do what they did in 2007 and trade back, or was it 2008 with Jordy Nelson and trade back a few spots from end of the first round to early second, pick up a fourth round pick. They could either use that pick or use it to trade up in the second or third rounds for a guy that they had targeted who they don't think is going to make it to them. I could easily see something like that happening in this draft too.
All right, well, we'll see. We're a little ways away from the draft. However, it'll creep up on us before we know it, April 23rd through April 25th. Pete, I want to discuss what I would consider the elephant in the room. The reason that we are not in the same room right now is the coronavirus. We are practicing our best social distancing, and the league is also doing its best to keep its players, its coaches, all the personnel safe as well. The Packers offseason program was supposed to begin on April 20th. However, that has been postponed indefinitely. My biggest question is, how likely is it that players who are supposed to receive workout bonuses in their contracts, do they receive those bonuses if there are no workouts?
Yeah, that's I think that's it's got to be an open question right now. I don't know how courts would rule on that. Mike Florio runs Pro Football Talk. He's an attorney, or he was an attorney till he got into the news aggregating business. So he writes really intelligently about these things. He thinks the players have a pretty decent argument that they should get paid for this. There's nothing explicit in the CBA that says they shouldn't, whereas the NBA CBA has it explicitly in there. It mentions all these things, including a pandemic, that then the players don't get paid. The NFL CBA does not have that. So, it's an open question, and maybe something, I don't know if the courts would end up having to determine that, or it could be it could end up being a big legal fight for the off-season stuff. I'm talking about salary for the regular season if that got postponed or canceled. For the off-season stuff, maybe they'll work out something where they can have meetings as you and I are meeting right here, and that'll count for part of their off-season program for participation, and they can go do their workouts where maybe they have to video their workout or have somebody certify that they did the workout they're supposed to. So there might be ways to work around that. But I'm sure right now all the executives, the attorneys for teams, the cap people, the administrators are working with the GMs and the league office and trying to figure all this stuff out. I'm sure they're still up to their neck in work because there's just so many things that you take for granted that this is waylaying, and they're just going to have to do a lot of workarounds for all of these things. Starting obviously with the draft coming up in, was it 4 or 5 weeks? 4 weeks, I guess.
The situation is so fluid. It's challenging to see exactly what the league will end up doing there. However, we will find out in the future. Another question that's been floating around too is, how will a lack of an off-season program impact the rookie class that's incoming this year?
I think quite a bit. The thing is, it'll be equal for everybody. So I think the teams that are going to be hit the hardest by this reduced or non-existent off-season program, they'll be the ones with new head coaches. They usually they always get an extra mini camp. Teams with a new offensive or defensive coordinator where that guy is bringing in a new system, and teams with a new quarterback. I think those are all the teams that will have the biggest problem. So the Packers in that regard are fortunate that they had their coaching change last year and not this year. So most of the guys will know the offense pretty well, and they're already speaking the same language and all those things.
Mm-hmm. We'll see how they decide to address the incoming rookie class, and how also will be interesting to see how free agency looks in retrospective, seeing as it's going to be important for the Packers to bring in more veteran presence than it will be perhaps to have a rookie class, because they're going to have the rookies no matter what. However, the rookies won't have had the NFL experience in the past. Perhaps there will be some more of an emphasis on having those starters already in place, just in case, the rookies aren't ready to go by the time the season rolls around. So we'll address that in the coming weeks. However, let's get to some of your questions before we go any further. Everyone, thank you for your patience. I want to talk to, Daniel here. Daniel says that he likes the signing so far that Brian Gutekunst was able to do, more than he thought, for sure. During the combine, general manager Brian Gutekunst already said, hey, this year's free agency is not going to be like last year's free agency, when they were able to bring on 4 free agents outside linebackers, Preston and Zadarius Smith, right guard Billy Turner, and safety Adrian Amos, and he was able to pay them big money. This year, it's looking different. As we've mentioned multiple times, we don't know exactly how much Devin Funchess is going to make. However, we do know that Christian Kirksey and Rick Wagner are combining for around $9 million cap hit in 2020. Pete, what were your expectations for the Packers coming into free agency this year?
So my thought was, and I'm pretty sure I can prove this by going back into the chats before free agency started. My thought was they'd sign an inside linebacker and a tackle, a veteran guy to be, this was assuming Bulaga moved on, to be a stopgap guy. I was thinking the cost of those guys would be anywhere from $2.5 to $5 million a year, on a 1 or 2 year deal, but it could very easily end up being that they just played here one season and that they'd probably draft high at both of those positions too. And then, but I did think, and I wondered if they'd do the same with a defensive lineman, just a run stopper, even going on the cheaper side, $2 or $3 million a year for one of those guys. But I did think that they'd spend somewhere between, I'm just kind of, I don't know, between $7 and $11 million on a either a tight end or a receiver. And I really thought Hooper was someone. I thought he had Brian Gutekunst written all over him because young, good injury history. He's only 25, which, anybody coming off only 4 years in the league is younger, but 25 is on the younger side, even for a first-time free agent. And he's a good blocker, so he fits that offense. He's not a great receiver, but he's pretty decent. So even if he ended up not being much of an impact as a receiver, relatively speaking, he's a good blocker, which with the outside zone scheme. So anyway, they ended up not going after him for $11 million a year. So it's looking like he's not going to spend, although you never know what opportunity might present itself. I was trying to think, I'd have to look it up. I know when they signed Charles Woodson, that was at least 2 weeks after free agency started. Might even have been 3 weeks after free agency started. So you never know if there's somebody they're waiting for the price just to come down a little more, or if there's a trade opportunity that becomes available that wasn't available last week or they didn't know about last week. So there still could be a bigger move to come. Odds are against it, pretty strongly against it, but you just don't know what might be cooking out there.
Thank you for this question, Daniel. We'll take Dean's question next. Dean asks, should the Packers be confident with tight ends Jay Sternberger and Robert Tonyan as the tight ends going into next year? In addition to Sternberger and Tonyan, Mercedes Lewis is coming back to the Packers on a 1-year deal, and they also have tight end Evan Bayless as well, who spent some time back and forth on the practice squad and the active roster last season. Both of these tight ends, Sternberger and Tonyan, dealt with injuries throughout the season last year. Sternberger missed a huge portion of the beginning of the season after getting injured in training camp, and then Tonyan injured himself around, I want to say, in the opening quarter of the season, ended up having to get core muscle surgery, as our Tom Silverstein reported after the season. How likely is it that the Packers add another tight end to this group by the time training camp comes around?
I would think they would add somebody, if nothing else, either through the draft or the signing an undrafted guy. It's not looking real likely that they're going to sign a free agent at that position now, somebody who's, on the market right now. Kind of to go to the question there, how confident would you be? I mean, they're doing some projecting there. Now, Sternberger showed some ability. He blocked better than you ever would have guessed because he did not do a lot of blocking at Texas A&M. His whole thing was running routes and catching the ball. And I guess the question with Tonyan was, he was a guy who you thought might break out last year. Then he got he had the injury, which we didn't know was a core muscle injury till after the season. You do have to wonder how much that affected his play because he really did. That was a really good catch he made against Dallas. And I think that's the play where he got hurt. Was where he came down. It was along the sidelines, a leaping catch, came down on one leg, and then I think he missed several games after that because he got hurt on that play, and they called it a hip injury, if I remember right. So he's got some ability, but he still hasn't produced at a level that would make you super confident. But maybe the Packers think that the injury really affected his play, but they are looking for both of those guys. They've got to be projecting for both of those guys to be better players than they were last season. And with Sternberger, especially going from rookie year to second year, that is a time when a lot of players, start making really significant growth second and third seasons. That's usually when you see guys make jumps.
Bigger roles for Sternberger and Tanyan in 2020, we will certainly find out, but it's certainly what the Packers are expecting from them. Thank you for your question, Dean. Jerron, we'll take this fun question. Why not? Do we see the Packers signing former Panthers quarterback Cam Newton in free agency? Pete, the Packers have made it clear that they would consider drafting the right quarterback this offseason if the right guy was there. However, what about the right free agent quarterback? There's quite a few of them out there, including former Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback Jameis Winston, quarterback Andy Dalton of the Bengals. What about Cam Newton, Pete?
I would think the chances of Cam Newton wanting to come to a place like Green Bay would be close to nil. I would think he'd want to go somewhere where it would be at least a chance for him, if he's healthy, to be the starter. He's in a really bad spot because, nobody's going to want to sink any money into him not knowing how his shoulder is. They'd want to have their doctors look at it. You can't trust a doctor who's not on your staff. You don't want to entrust that to somebody else. So they're taking a real chance. So all this is really hurting him, the inability to get a physical. But I would assume he's going to go somewhere where he at least would have a chance to, compete for the job, or for a team that's a little shaky with their starter, where if there's any struggles, he'd get a chance to play. Whereas, here the only way he'd get on the field is if Aaron Rodgers got injured.
Perhaps the timing is not right now. Never say never. Who knows, Jerron? Thank you for a fun question. Let's take this question from David. He asks, where do you think the confidence level is with the Packers and the depth of their offensive line? We'll talk about some of the backups right now. Well, let's start at tackle. I think that has been an issue, or just a general concern last year, especially when the Packers saw Brian Bulaga go down. A couple of times they were able to put in tackle Jared Veldheer in his place. He was a late season addition. Veldheer is a free agent. Other tackles they currently have right now, besides the signing of Rick Wagner this offseason, they also have Alex Light and John Leglue. Besides that, it's the depth there at tackle is a bit lacking. How likely do you think it is that the Packers try to address that tackle spot in the remainder of this offseason?
Oh, I would think really high. I would think, they got to draft one somewhere, and there's a decent chance they'll do it in the first 3 rounds. It's not a given. It depends what else is available when they're picking and all those things. But even with the signing of Wagner, that could, even if he's the starter, that could be a 1-year thing. They need to start developing somebody. Right tackle is such an important position. Both tackles are. So they've got to start developing somebody there. I would think they feel good about on the inside, because Lucas Patrick, they signed him to a contract extension late last season, and when he filled in, he did a really nice job. So I would think inside they feel okay. I'm really curious I'm wondering what's going on with Lane Taylor. I would have thought, now that they paid the roster bonus to Billy Turner, I would have thought Taylor, they might have cut Taylor by now, though they don't owe him any money till the season starts. And if he gets hurt working out on his own, they're not on the hook for it. So maybe they're waiting to see how the draft goes before they make any moves there. But they could pick up $4.6 million in cap room, which, as we were talking earlier, they could still use that room for extensions and other things, if not for signing, a player at a different position this offseason. So I'm really curious to see what they do there. Maybe he's one of their fallbacks if they don't draft one, because he played tackle in college, and so he could fill in anywhere. But that's a pretty expensive guy, especially when you have Lucas Patrick as the top guy for the inside 3 backup. So I think they have to feel pretty decent about inside, but at tackle, I would think they would be really concerned about their depth at that position. I don't know that Valdir would be the answer unless they end up not drafting someone. Maybe then revisit him after the draft.
The story of the Packers offensive line this offseason is not finished being written. We'll see what the Packers decide to do in the draft. I'll take this question here from Justin. He says there's a lot of speculation going around with the draft and the Packers possibly not picking at 30. What are the odds that the Packers decide to trade up or trade down? Pete, how likely is it that they move out of the 30 spot either way?
Yeah, you can think yourself into knots trying to figure out what they're going to do, what they might do. I mean, all possibilities are open. Generally speaking, trade back seems more likely than trade up. But you never know if there could be some guy they really like and they would be willing to trade a 3 or a 4 to move up several spots and pick him. You never know with these things. I would guess there's a better chance of trading back though, picking up an extra pick, especially with the depth at receiver. There might be a guy that they really like at receiver who they think they could get at 35 or 6. So they trade back to there and they pick up an extra pick and still get that guy. That's all part of the gamesmanship and the reconnaissance you have to do in figuring out what other teams are thinking and where guys are going to get drafted. And we could talk about these things forever, but it is so hard to predict. It's impossible to predict what they're going to do because you never know what one guy, Brian Gutekunst, it all comes down to what he's thinking, and you just never know.
Luckily, we do have forever until the draft. It feels like that. We have another month until the draft rolls around, and we will continue to have these conversations with all of you here on our social media platforms. So keep bringing your questions. We're going to end it off here tonight, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you're all doing well and staying safe and practicing your best social distancing skills, just like Pete and I are today. We're wishing you and your loved ones very well, and we will see you next time. Have a good night.